Not yet. I'm going to very formally introduce you first, and then you can share. All right. Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. This is actually our last session in this round of the virtual meeting series on the psychology of resistance in violent and repressive context, and we'll be continuing in September. There will be a call for presentations, so if any of you is interested in presenting in this series, please submit. I'll send the form later. But today we are very lucky to finally have one of our more innovative, I think, concepts for this series, the peer review as a conversation format, where we do the peer review live on screen with not anonymous reviewer one, reviewer two, but two friendly faces, and we'll do this as a conversation together. So Janan will first present their work on power and resistance in the Kurdish diaspora context in Belgium. The proper title will come soon when they pull up their slides. And then Michel Twali and Young Jeong will respond. And we'll have first the conversation among the reviewers with the authors, and then we'll open up to the broader audience. So that's the plan. We have 90 minutes, or now 87, because I always make these introductions too long. So to introduce Janan, Janan is an independent, or Dr. Joshkan is an independent researcher with scientific affiliation to the Center for Social and Cultural Psychology at the Université Libre de Bruxelles in Belgium. Brussels. And then our two peer reviewers are both also experts on power. Both of them worked on this topic in their dissertation and other work they did at Clark University, working together with me, my two former PhD students that I'm very proud of. Hu Young is now a Frank Betten School of Leadership and Public Policy postdoctoral fellow at the University of Virginia, and Michel Twali is an assistant professor in the Applied Psychology Department, Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development at NYU. So we will get started now. And Janan, you can share your slides.
Perfect. Can you see it?
Yes, now we can.
That's great. I will make it larger. My computer is a bit slow, so okay. Thanks again for the very nice welcoming, and thanks for organizing, planning, arranging this. I also want to thank the reviewers, Michelle and Hu Yong. It's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to feedback from you both. Okay, just quickly, I'm working for a different understanding of power. That's what I'm trying to do for many years now, almost 8 years. It is slow because I'm an independent researcher and it's hard to conduct research fields for me. It's an intentional departure from hegemonic representations of power, oppression, and conflict. I'm trying to theorize about power from below epistemologies as experienced and explicated by Kurdish community members. And we have already published some work on that, but it was limited with the Turkish and Northern Kurdistan context. Now I'm trying to extend this to the diaspora context. I'm drawing on anti-colonial, critical race, and liberation approaches to social power. First of all, the idea starts with the fact that oppressed groups were not dominated because they did not have any power, any understanding of practice of modernity, or any kind of practicization of civilization. So it's a kind of refusal of zero-point epistemologies. Furthermore, we also know that power is multifarious and multiform. And upon that, I wanted to add also the fact that what we are calling power is an output of the processes of desire. So we have social assemblages, collectivities that are produced through desire and affect, and power is only a stratified dimension of that assemblage. And furthermore, this kind of assemblages can produce lines of flight, not always as in resistance per se, but as alternative creations, call it prefiguration or call it a slipping away from the hegemonic power. And all of this is coming from the epistemological roots, because power of the oppressed is a subaltern epistemology. It has been also theorized as a third way, as becoming alternative decentralized power building for democratic modernity by Kurdish leader Öcalan. I also build on the concept of exteriority in existence and resistance as developed by Enrique Dussel. So it is kind of not a dialectical power, but an analectical power, meaning that as you are being pushed at the margins, as you are getting away, forced away from the structural resources, you try to produce new ways of existing, knowing and producing, or you try to continue your ways of existing without the exact knowledge of the hegemonic power. So the hegemonic power cannot always see your ways of being, knowing and producing. And that's on one side an opportunity, but also because of structural inequalities. But it creates hyperpotentia, a state of rebellion, in fact, can sometimes disarm the state of exception. And as I was moving on my way, I felt not alone in the discipline, because I've been encountering research on decolonial community praxis in India and Palestine, by Devin and Urmi Tapa about counter-storytelling and leveraging resources for resistance. Also Michelle's work about the sociological level of understanding of power among Black Americans. Also Hu Yan's work on Asian American psychopolitical power, which was more based on needs framework of Prelatensky. And recently I encountered they recently published research which was trying to connect Black Americans' power and collective action. Furthermore, there are also evidence of resistance and collective action that can undermine colonial destructive power among Puerto Ricans. So how do I try to conceptualize this? I name it power from below. And to me, from the field works that I've done until dawn, it's a potential to imagine or to realize your individual and collective agency, either against or away from the hegemony, based on your structural exteriority. It is driven by a desire to exist even before acting in collectivity. So agency doesn't have to be enacted or accomplished. It is sufficient that you know it's there, you know there's a potential, and when you want, you can enact based on your available resources. It is also rooted in the historical experience of flows and shifts in the intertwinings of agency and structure. So unlike the traditional conceptualization of polarized agency and structure views, those factors are intertwined. This also means that indigenous sovereignty of land, resources, and social organization and structural units. So there is this knowledge in the community. There's also the knowledge from the suffering of the asymmetrical control of resources with detrimental consequences in economic, social, cultural, and even emotional relationships. Still, being at the margins or outside of the colonial center has some opportunities, provides some opportunities. It provides different constituents of power grown out of the exteriority of the oppressed group. And it is embedded in community relations, and it is capable of escaping assimilation and absolute domination from time to time. As such, it is also similar to the concept of transversality as used by Deleuze and Guattari. So it's a collective agency that exists before the power relations emerge, and because of that, it can also escape the hegemonic power. All of this rootedness in ontoepistemology is also through the accumulation of knowledge of oppression over centuries and resistance over centuries, which gives us knowledge about the oppressive logics and what to expect from the hegemonic power, and a toolbox of what can be done against it or away from it. Thus, power of the oppressed emerges as a subaltern epistemology. When social identities emerge, and that's a critic of social identity theory in general in social psychology, I might say, because it's so central in the theorization of social power as well, but maybe it doesn't have to be so central, because the social identities can, in fact, be the after effects of a desire to develop productive capacities within those collective assemblages, within the organizational structural problems. So Kurdishness can be seen as a fugitive, but also sometimes contested space in the social assemblage of collective existence. It also involves, of course, counter-narratives, and this involves contested social representations and collective memories. It is based on refusing the hegemonic representations and producing community prefigurations for alternatives to the hegemonic power. As I said, it is visible to the colonialist mentality, especially when it translates into implicit or explicit acts of resistance, either on psychological, cultural, or material level. It defies a dualistic understanding of being powerful and powerless. So you are not one or the other. You have some power resources that you instrumentalize in your collectivity. So resisting oppression, pursuing social change, and working toward liberation is a form of power reinvented from below. For instance, in our earlier fieldworks, we have seen that transforming one's own community was itself mentioned as a source of power. That belief, that efficacy belief that you can transform your own society also gives an efficacy belief of toward the future that you can also change the hegemonic structure at some point. Shortly, my previous research, as I said, was contextualized in Turkey and North Kurdistan. We have conducted semi-structured interviews, one-to-one surveying, and information workshops. And we have seen that power is multifaceted, multi-layered, contextually, relationally, and dynamically shaped. We have seen, in fact, narratives, expressions, and evidence of alternative understandings of power through grassroots solidarity, anti-colonial, anti-racist consciousness, mobilization efficacy, and distinct ties to the land. And unfortunately, we also know that that kind of power understanding does not always escape the hegemonic power. Sometimes it either imitates or reproduces the hegemonic power relationships in the intergroup relations as well. As such, I have tried to visualize it as a social ecosystem of representations, but also boundary making. As I said, it is expressed through agentic counter narratives. And from the surveys, what we could see empirically was a distinction between a sense of power from below, containing a sense of power of solidarity, power for change, and bottom-up power, and another sense of privileged power, which was mostly lacking among our Kurdish participants, which involved top-down power, power of ownership, owning lands, rights, resources, and power for recognition. When we try to distinguish the Kurdishness, we have seen that there was that identity as a Kurd in umbrella terms, but there were also distinctions. There was a Kurdistani identity more tied to the land and partially patriotic, but partially essentialized. And there was also Kurdish liberation movement identification, which was more in line with the social mobilization of our current times. And that Kurdish liberation movement identification was associated with more power from below and less power for recognition, also indicating some distinctions between power from below and privileged power. But it's not always as simple as I say, because, for instance, when we looked into the details of migration in the data, we have seen that those who were internally displaced in the region, we call them internal diaspora, have felt higher power for change, higher power for ownership, and less power from the top down, meaning the decision making. So here we see a combination of power from below and some components of privileged power as power of ownership, because maybe the networks allow them to express more about rights. It is possible. And finally, with Helen, we have seen that all of those discourses inform multiple resistance strategies in Germany diaspora among Kurdish migrants. So this brought me to conduct a research in Belgium among Kurdish diaspora. It is one of the largest communities living in Europe, 2 million of population overall Europe. In Belgium, it is really a small population of Kurdish communities. As you can see, 100,000 compared to 2 million is not too much. Then why Belgium? First of all, there were practical matters. I had a scholar research fund here, but more importantly, Belgium was one of the first country of exile for Kurds to form the first semi-formal or formal Kurdish diasporic organizations and international institutionalization. So the Kurdistan National Congress is here in Brussels, still active, conveying diplomatic relationships with the European Parliament, but also managing all of the social and political discourses within the Kurdish liberation movement. And the press, especially the Kurdish liberation movement related press, is broadcasting to the world from here, from Belgium. So there's a source of power here, although the community is not really large. There are several different waves of migration from Turkey and North Kurdistan to Belgium. First, small group of families came during the labor exploitation deal with Turkey during 60s. They were not strongly politicized, but they had a critical consciousness of cultural Kurdishness. But their children were more politicized because this was followed up by larger politicized groups who came during 70s and 90s because of forced migration and political exile caused by the Turkish violence. And they were the first ones to organize political mobilization here in Belgium. Further politicized groups came after the eruptive reconciliation process after 2015 in Turkey. And later, with the Syrian proxy wars, Kurds from Rojava in Syria started to come here to seek refuge from the war. So we can generally talk about the large and disseminated Kurdish communities over different cities and villages of Belgium. They are highly mobilized, but less organized in daily life. And they are simultaneously dealing with European migration policies, trying to be integrated in the society because they have to work, and transnational repression because there's a higher population of post-migrant Turks here in Europe and Belgium. And they are more so-called hegemonically powerful, I would say. Okay, coming to the current research. What did I do? It was last year already, so I tried to conceptualize and see the diasporic agency and see the fact that neither Turks or Kurds here are receptive subjects of exporting the homeland conflict. So the relationships are reconfigured here, but sometimes it imitates the homeland conflicts, of course. So diaspora as a context is tied to multiple homelands for Kurds. There's Turkey, North Kurdistan, and larger Kurdistan. Here, Kurds are less despised by the Belgian autochthons because they are seen as, hey, you fought against ISIS, you are brave heroes, or with the comparisons with the Turkish migrant laborers, you are not like Turkish migrants, they are lazy, etc., etc. So there's a different layers of discrimination and exclusion, but they still feel discriminated as migrants in daily life because it is really hard to navigate within the European and Belgian bureaucracy of receiving social support as a migrant, finding a job, etc., etc. And they are tied to translocal Kurdish communities in Europe and beyond. So my aim was to extend the previously shared conceptual approach to the migration context. But in doing that, I didn't explore to replicate the conceptual approach. I just wanted to explore what's going on. I was specifically focusing on understanding what does Kurdish power in diaspora mean for post-migrants in Belgium, post-migrant Kurds. How do they understand, express, explain the power of Kurds within structural intergroup, intragroup, interpersonal, and individual levels, as well as looking into the processes of social, historical, cultural, ethno-racial, political, and economic processes. And then how do these power understandings contribute to their post-migration experiences in Belgium, the Kurdish community in general here, and the Kurdish liberation struggle. So the research field had two steps. At the first step, I conducted in-depth semi-structured interviews. Normally, you would expect a semi-structured interview to be like half an hour at most, but hours were really long. We discussed in length, and I didn't stop the participants until they were tired of speaking and done with their narratives. I just wanted to return to the issue of Kurdish power as they deviated from the main focus of my research questions. So each time they were narrating something, I was asking, how do you see this as related to Kurdish power, or is it related to Kurdish power, etc. I communicated with 24 Kurds. You can, if you want, we will share the draft manuscript. There you can see all of the demographic details, but it was a very heterogeneous groups with politicized, depoliticized, and apolitical Kurds. There were first generation of migrants and second generation post-migrants. And I tried to specifically include Kurdish LGBTQ voices as well. At the end, after 24 participants, there was a level of high saturation, and I stopped and I started to conduct reflexive thematic analysis with a critical realist approach using both inductive and deductive approaches. I had more than 2,000 extracts. These are long quotes of 3 to 8 sentences, but at the 9th or 10th participant, I stopped doing the analysis. Why? Because I had a second step. I stopped the analysis. I prepared a preliminary segmentization of the codes, of the sub-themes and the themes as I generated. Then I contacted again the previous participants. Let's meet for doing some community workshops. These were aimed at critically discussing the preliminary findings and allowing participants to intervene into the analysis and the interpretation processes. In total, 12 participants joined. Only 2 of them were new peoples, but we knew them beforehand because they were tied to the previous participants. We had 3 to 5 participants in each group. And this also involved 2 steps. First, I made a list of 50 quotes from my analysis, and I asked them, what comes to your mind in terms of power when you read these quotes? And we read the quotes collectively, and they individually coded each quotations. And then we started to discuss collectively how they coded, how I coded. So we discussed about the process of the analysis. They got to know more about the details of the analysis as well, experiencing it from the first hand. Then I presented my finding, that preliminary schematization with sub-themes, themes, and codes. And then participants started to discuss and criticize the codes, categories, themes. They suggested names and labels. So we tried to reconceptualize the schematization. This participatory action research had community benefits because it was a collective analysis that supports collective agency. So the action itself was kind of an analysis together. It allowed heterogeneous in-group perspectives beyond friendship political cliques. It enhanced community reflexivity, underlined community voices. It also had research benefits. First of all, we managed to dismantle the researcher-participant epistemic power asymmetry. I had a community responsibility. I wanted to give the full transparency of the analysis, which I managed. And I assured the collective opacity, meaning that some of the things that didn't need to go to the out world, that needed to stay among us, stayed among us. It also served the purpose of consolidation of the findings from the reflexive thematic analysis, and it helped me to member check with the participants. Overall, I generated 8 themes with all of those 2 processes. So each theme underlines a distinct shared meaning about Kurdish power, but there are many overlaps. And some sub-themes in a specific theme share some meanings with other sub-themes from another theme. When I look at the overall picture, I see diasporic Kurdish power in 3 realms or planes of existence, if we call that. First of all, Kurdish power is embedded in or navigated around spatial, temporal, and relational contexts. For instance, they are talking about colonial or liberated homeland, being in diaspora, or regulating themselves within migration policies. They are talking about intragroup and intergroup relationships. And in all the way doing this, we are also considering together all of the geopolitical periods of escalations and de-escalations of the asymmetrical conflict. Kurdish power also seemed to be rooted in different sources, material and organizational sources, onto epistemological sources, emotional and cultural sources as well. It is also expressed across oppression resistance domains, such as diplomacy, everyday resistance, refusals, armed struggles, solidarity, and protests. So as such, I think it's fair enough to name it power from below and to conceptualize it as a potential to imagine or to realize your individual or collective agency, either against or away from the hegemony based on your exteriority. But again, we see some reproduction of the hegemonic power as well. So this is the full picture of the 8 themes with several sub-themes pictured here. We see strong roots with some roses and thorns, specifically talking about the barriers, social dissolution factor within the Belgian society as they try to integrate here, but also intragroup dynamics. People talked about individual political or non-political paths to pursue the way they desire to exist as a Kurd. They have talked about strategic relationality and solidarity. So this is just one instance. There are many dimensions to it. I will shortly describe some of the teams with some sub-teams, and then I will stop so that we can talk more. So for instance, in the second team that we called We See, You Deny to See Us, one of the sub-teams was recognition and non-recognition. So participants mostly referred to how they understand the big powers as US and the EU, and they were acknowledging the fact that there is no recognition in imperial capitalist nation state order for a people like them without a nation state. And then this was another problematizing. Do we really need a state? Because the political organization of Kurdish liberation movement and the ideology has transformed from an independence movement to a democratic modernity movement. Furthermore, they were expressing a sense of recognition thanks to the fight of the Kurdish liberation movement, because it provided them a representational visibility here in Europe as well. For instance, they were saying, now we can say that we're Kurds. Kurdish movement created a zone of recognition for Kurdish identity. And there were also recognition through the fight against ISIS as it was actualized in the Rojava revolution. But they had that critical consciousness specifically expressed as an instrumentalization in the international realm. They were saying that we are treated as token, pawns, or joker in the geopolitical field, but we are so much beyond that. We realize that, and we are so much beyond that. This is just one example from one participant, Ibish. If they don't do that, they cannot do politics in Mesopotamia because it is the Kurds who exist there. For instance, let's say you will fight against ISIS. You cannot do that without the PKK and the YPG. That's why we acquired some recognition in Rojava. But then he continues, so they can also make other deals with other people. It's not out of love that they are recognizing us. If they find another ally, they would go with another ally, as we now see in the status of Syria currently. I will just pass the theoretical microlinks just to present a few more sub-teams. Being here, feeling there was another team. And within it, there was a sub-team named Negotiating Spaces and Interaction for Kurdishness. So it's an agentic effort to negotiate yourself and your community in Belgium and in Turkey, either by avoiding the Turkish spaces here in Belgium, telling others about Kurds, and also fighting the racial erasure here, explaining Kurdishness to those who deserve, because sometimes they are tired to explain their ethno-racial belongingness. Coming together in events, keep up your ways of being living in daily life, and protecting family and friends who stayed in Kurdistan by talking superficially on phone. And in Turkey and Kurdistan, it was important for them to keep up with the news. So most of them cannot go back to Turkey and Kurdistan. So they really valorize keeping up with the political news. They are curious about the intergroup interactions in daily life in Turkey and Kurdistan. And of course, there are feelings of home and estrangement. Another theme was We Build Us. It's a sense of material and organizational power. And one of the interesting ways that they managed to express this was through collective agency, how they make sense of collective agency. I think it's a very authentic way of expressing that kind of collective agency. On one side, being autonomous and independent as a self-power without depending to hegemonic powers. On the other side, about in-group solidarity. One of the participants was comparing this to clapping sound. So it's not only about the clapping sound, it's the two hands that are coming together. If one hand is there, that you can do this, but you can't clap. But when you see the second hand, you know that at some point you can clap. So it's something like that collective agency. That's how we can express it, I think. There were also strategies in terms of material organizational power. There are diplomatic bonds, there are lobbying efforts. A third way ideology is creating alternative power and information sharing, self-defense, developing new strategies for this new era, and joining cultural activities. We also had we know what we live. This is the sense of onto epistemological power, I think. It included national homeland belonging, ideological power, generations, transformation, societal internal transformation, as in rebalancing the unequal gender relationships, and matters of historical continuity and discontinuity. One of the striking sub-themes was ideological power, because it was rooted in culture, but it was also politicized during the social movement. Many participants were referring to action reaction. So it was a sense making of denial, existence, and violence and self-defense. Furthermore, there were specific ideologized ways of making power on their own. For instance, Hebun, which means being or becoming yourself. It is about overcoming the colonial shame, finding, learning, and knowing yourself. It is a source of epistemic resistance. Hebun, it's a sense of existence. We exist. We are here. We don't stop to exist just because we are oppressed. It also included a sense of self-power. Also Zanebun, like knowing the life through the practice, it was also a source of fearlessness and steadfastness. For instance, one of the participants in here was talking about how the cost of the struggle is also linked to the struggle to exist, but also as a struggle to exist as a Kurdish woman. So it's a reclaiming existence and being here as well. Okay, it's been already too long, so I'm now stopping. But basically, what we could see is that power among oppressed but resistant groups can be more complex than we assume. It relies on epistemological of historical existence, sovereignty, and exteriority. It is not devoid of structural power. It is reconfigured in context. It draws on ideological leadership, especially when it can be shared horizontally. It involves both powerfulness and powerlessness. So it is embedded in or navigated around spatial, temporal, and relational contexts, rooted in different sources, and expressed across oppression and resistance domains. Thank you, and that was all. I will now stop.
Yes, thank you, Canan.
Okay.
All right, who wants to go first, Young or Michelle?
I can go first.
Yes, please do, Young.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shannon. Like this was, it is so clear that this is a work of passion and love, and I very much enjoy reading this manuscript. And thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to review this paper. Um, yeah, we need more of this kind of work in the field of social psychology, and I really appreciated your efforts, energy, time, and very careful attention to details. Yeah, I'll first start with the many strengths of this paper. Yeah, this concept of power from below as an aspirational, contextual, and relational, socially embedded concept is very noble, and it bridges agency and resistance outside the hegemonic definitions of power and hegemonic discourse of power. And like this is a very much of a community-oriented, community-based knowledge production project, which is very rare in social psychology, Western social psychology, in my opinion. Yeah, and your combination of reflexive thematic analysis and participatory action research was very I wish I could done such a kind of work, and I cannot imagine the time and effort and energy you must have been spending on this project. And it really was a humbling experience reading this manuscript. Yeah, and I was also impressed by your very broad and extensive reviews of different approaches to power, such as liberation psychology, critical race theory, decolonial approach, and also to lesser degrees of social identity theory. And it is very clear that it is an intellectually ambitious project and very theoretically, I would say, generative research. And it was a very dialectic work, and I very much enjoyed reading this build up to your points from a very different critical angles. Yeah, so all in all, I will say kudos. This is a really great work, and I can't wait to see it published in a academic journal. If I may, if I can offer you some insights, well, recommendations for improvements. I think the there are not many, but the one thing that really jumped out was the density of your manuscript. There was, I believe, there was 27,000 words, and your thematic map is, I mean, it is wonderfully complex and rich, structure of themes, but as someone who's not really familiar with this Kurdish diaspora context in Belgium, and someone who is not as well read as you in terms of like liberation psychology, for example, and decolonial psychology, the density of the density of your theoretical reviews as well as your presentation of themes was a bit overwhelming, in my opinion. And I think there, I think there can be, if you want, there can be, I think, multiple papers you can write based on this one project. And I don't think you have to really just present everything in one paper. Um, and I noticed that some themes or sub-themes could be uh, taken out from this paper because I felt like some themes were not directly related to your power from below concept. Maybe as you develop this manuscript further, you can clarify more on the relationship between themes and your main central concept. But some themes seem a bit too peripheral, if you will. Um, Also, there is a issue of positioning this paper. So, it is not a fun. I think the most painful part of doing a qualitative work and trying to publish it in a more mainstream Western psychological outlet is that you actually have to engage with the existing theories, and you have to acknowledge them. And I think you're trying to do that with the social identity theory and other theoretical frameworks in psychology. Um, in the literature review section, and I think you could do that more with how you present your themes. When you present your themes, you can briefly mention how each theme addresses the unresolved issues in the literature of psychology, or you can talk more about how you can integrate your concepts to the existing theory. And like you may not feel that your themes are like particularly consistent with the existing frameworks in the literature of psychology, but like this is a more strategic things you need to do when you want to publish papers. Yeah, I have several more points, but I will stop here because I just don't want to keep talking, and yeah, this should be more like a conversation, right? So yeah.
Thank you, Young. Michelle?
Thank you so much, Janan, for submitting the paper. It was really great to read it. And Young has spoken eloquently about all the strengths of the paper. So I won't go too much into detail with that because I agree with him on those points. I especially, but I'll highlight one thing. As you know, when I started working on issues about power, one of the things, and I saw that in your reflection as well in the paper, as well as in your presentation today, was this assumption, general, unspoken, but assumption in most of the theories that existed at the time that power was this top-down process that meant that there was this distinction between the powerful and then the powerless, and the powerless tended to be all the folks who are oppressed, minoritized, have experienced both historical and contemporary violence. So it's been a pleasure following your work. Going against this assumption in theories of power and social psychology, but also deep diving into a particular context, because that's also one thing that we don't do that well. We study context broadly, and it's really been wonderful learning about Kurdish history, honestly, from your work and other folks who you've collaborated with as well, but also learning about the conceptualization of power within this particular context. So I appreciate your effort in doing that over multiple years. The paper that you sent, I thought, was really crucial because, like you said, a lot of the work that had been done, even although this work is fresh, like the idea of power from below, I would borrow your terms to reflect my work as well as Young and others' work, is still quite new. And, one of the things that was still, has been featuring in all our work is really focusing on power from groups within the context that is a feature of their historical violence. So Black Americans in my experience and Asian Americans for Young. So reading this from the, power, how power is conceptualized from the diaspora experience was I thought was, not just empirically an important empirical addition, but also broaden the ideas of power beyond just the context in which you're in. So theoretically, I found it quite rich, and methodologically as well. I thought the idea of member checking through showing your initial analysis to the participants that you had already interviewed was really great. I was actually going to ask you what you meant by PAR, like the action part of PAR, based on your work, but you explained that that was part of the analysis in your presentation. I think it would be great to highlight that because any PAR in the paper, because any PAR, theologian, I guess, would really be wondering where the action part of it was. So I would definitely recommend highlighting that in the manuscript as well, because as you explained in the presentation, the idea of bringing community members together, especially given some of the findings were about how, as a member of the diaspora, there's this desire to create bonds despite the contextual difficulty of doing so in a very capitalistic society like Belgium. So I think highlighting that as one of the action parts of the study would be wonderful in the manuscript. I think I had more questions, actually. I agree with Young, it was quite dense, so I had to read it a few times to like theoretically, I think it's important, but I think my fear would be that the message would be lost, if it's really hard to digest. I love the interdisciplinary nature of your writing. You can see that you draw beyond social psychology to include philosophy, decolonial studies from outside of psychology, because I looked at some of the references and they are not traditional psychology references. So I appreciate that. But I think, for my fear is the message being lost. So definitely clarifying some words would be helpful. One of the things that I had a question on was I saw some tension in your findings on like this sense of, especially from power from below, for the need for collective, I would say solidarity or like resistance as a collective versus this individual, I would say individual forms of power that you also reflected in some of your findings in terms of like individual, paths or political or non-political paths. So I was wondering like how you integrated, because it would be hard to think about non-political individual paths within a minoritized group as a form of power. So I was curious about how you made sense of some of this, um, um, I would say, tensions within the findings that sometimes would reflect a sense of, I would say, not powerlessness, but like devaluing or undermining the collectiveness of power. So that's one question. And then the other question I had was, you know, I think for when you outlined your findings in terms of like them being, contextualized, I wrote them here, contextualized, being understood as power being understood as having different sources of power, and also being expressed across, oppressive and resistance domains. I was curious how that like overall analysis is related to the themes, because I felt that there was a sort of um, um, disconnect between the specific themes that are, you know, I'm going to use a term like there's this book by um, Mario Smalls about Mario Smalls and Julia, I forget her last name, on how to make sense, how to evaluate qualitative work. And one of the things that they talk about is cognitive empathy, like making sure that the data really reflects the analysis reflects the data. And so like there was, does that, it's in my head, but I'm not sure if it's coming out properly verbally. But there was a little bit of a disconnect between some of the themes the quotes I was reading with the analysis that was, I'll give an example and I'll give you written feedback as well. For example, the section of Turkish violence, when I was reading the title, it didn't reflect the quote that was attached to it. So I was really curious about some of like the specific analysis that you had in relation to the quotes that supported that. And maybe one way that would help is to include additional quotes, because maybe that was reflected across the different quotes, but not necessarily in the one particular quote that was there. And related to the same point on like the Turkish violence too, because that felt more like like externalizing forms of power, like the idea of dominance. And so I was curious about how that necessarily reflects power from below, because there were a few quotes that were focusing on like the structural forms of power. But the research questions was related to how they understand Kurdish power, and how that is related to the experiences in Belgium. So I guess my question would be I guess the point maybe not necessarily the question was like some of the findings. I kept asking myself how they were related to the particular research question. And maybe it could be because I could see it if it's discussed in terms of like your previous paper exposing violence as a form of like this continuous form of exposing violence as a form of power, like, not allowing violence that is expressed against the group to remain hidden, but actually exposing it as a form of power. But the way it's described here felt more like a description of Turkish violence and, and not necessarily how that was related to Kurdishness, Kurdish forms of power. But then the other thing that I thought was really great that was reflected too in the Milden, the micro solidarity theme, sub-theme, was the idea of like in-group solidarity, like talking about how Kurds who are LGBTQ have formed these microsystems of solidarity against the broader, I guess, in-group exclusion. And I thought that was really, because it showed in a few other themes. So I was wondering if there was a way of highlighting that much more, because with the way it was, at least I saw that in the quote and not necessarily in the description. Because I think there's one thing when that is reflected of, minoritized groups or groups that are oppressed are these homogeneous groups. And I think showing how even within the in-group, there is some form of like exclusion that can happen. But even within that exclusion, there's this solidarity that exists between this, like, secondary exclusion groups would be important to highlight and be an important theoretical point for ideas about power from below. But I'm going to also stop here, and happy to share the paper the comments that I've had on the paper with you directly. Yeah.
Yeah, also in relation to what Michelle just said about the heterogeneity within this diaspora group. I think the fact that you intentionally included the LGBTQ plus communities' voices, as well as the woman's role in this whole resistance and liberation efforts, is like I think this betrays my earlier point on like cutting down on some things, but I think the intersectionality could be a whole another thing. I think that's like a really one of the many strengths that your paper is presenting. So yeah, just a quick comment on that.
Okay, this is a lot to respond to, Canan, and also at some point we want to open up to the audience. So I don't know how extensively you want to respond. Maybe you can pick out a few. I mean, you have a lot of notes and feedback, but if there's anything you want to clarify or maybe use to further the conceptual discussion, you can focus
Yes,
on that.
I will just shortly talk about some of the comments that Hu Yang and Michelle did. And again, thank you both for reading, commenting in this long, dense paper. I mean, it means a lot to me. I know, and it's hard to organize. And this is still the first draft, and you were the first ones to read it, but I know it's a big labor, so very much appreciated. Thank you both. Well, I wanted to talk about some of the density issues. Yes, I am struggling with the density. I didn't have time to show it in the presentation, but for each team, I have theoretical microlinks that I try to talk about. For instance, collective memories, historical resilience, social representations that are not hegemonic, or how collective victimization can come around in a diaspora context, especially when the white groups here are willing to categorize you differently with the Turks, etc. So there are many theoretical links that I already established, but it was really difficult to incorporate into the paper. One thing I'm struggling with is, so as you said, there's this decolonial liberation, critical race approach, and community research as well. It is coming with a different resources, theoretical and practical resources. And the way I want to publish it would be to find a most practical economic way of combining both. So I believe at some point I will come to that point, but it is still on the beginning. But at least I can see that also echoing both of your works, the power from below, as we try to define it, though differently from each other based on our theoretical frameworks and based on the context that we are working, is there. It's there. It's a distinction between powerlessness, that superficial distinction between powerlessness and powerfulness is can be defied, especially when we look from another perspective. And it is also partially thanks to the decolonial lens that I could discover that. So probably I will keep that on. I also want to come to Michelle's point about that individual non-political paths, because you see the distinctions and how I'm making sense of that in terms of Kurdish power. I think that's due to the fact that Kurds, even if they are depoliticized from the larger movement, they are not depoliticized. Even if they don't want to hear about the movement, they don't want to hear about the conflict or the resolution process, they are still into the news. Sometimes they discuss it with their friends, or they arrange their daily relationships within those networks still. So even if they choose non-political paths, they are still interested in politics, and it is driven from that historical collective memory of oppression and resistance, if you ask me. But also it is about indigenous sovereignty and knowledge about once upon a time you had the land, you had the resources, and you strived there. So that knowledge alone is sometimes sufficient enough to feel powerful, or to, how should I say this? To think about, to reflect about the power dynamics within and across Kurdish relationships. So that's one thing, I think. The second one, you had a major comment. You said that some findings are not very well tied to the data. I think I agree with you. And sometimes it is because I was quite sloppy in preparing the draft and the presentation. For instance, you exemplified the Turkish violence. There, it's about exposing the Turkish violence. That's for sure. And sometimes the quotes are too long to make it apparent. For instance, at that quote of Turkish extended national violence, at some point, Firaz was talking about all of that violence in Ghent. But on the other hand, later on, he was referring how he tried to make the connections between different Kurdish families in Ghent so that they can stick together, or at least not raise a Turkish flag in their shops. So there is more to come, but then it's too long. You need to choose, but maybe I can choose better quotations in those kinds of contexts. I think it's already okay. I spent a lot of time to talk. I can speak more, but maybe later if there are other comments and questions.
Maybe at this point we should open up to the rest and see if people want to add. Okay, I already see a hand, if that's okay. Steffi? This was a former
Hey everyone,
presenter.
I hope
You
you
can,
can
yeah.
hear me.
Yes,
I
we
want to
can.
say I love this presentation. It's a great subject. I have three quick questions. My first question is, how do you think how well the results that you have presented, how well they represent the general diaspora in Belgium? So if you had the chance to interview more, do you think your findings might change? And also, do you think that these results could potentially transfer to other settings like Germany or France? Or would you expect those countries to have completely different, maybe context features for Kurdish migrants? That's my first point. My second question was about the language. So I saw that you used Turkish for most of the interviews, if I remember correctly. Do you think that people might have commented differently if you had used the language of the host country? So Belgian, French, or Dutch? And then my final question is, do you think that it matters that there was a sympathetic interviewer? It sounds pretty much like an ethnographic interview where you were very friendly and nice. That there was either a sympathetic interviewer or then later the group of participants discussing the quotes. that could have driven the results, because we know from other research, for example, John Joss on system justification, that individuals in minorities, they often do not have an immediate sense of power. They feel not only maybe powerless, but they start justifying that they should be in an inferior position. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thanks very much. It was lovely to have a chance to participate today.
Shall I quickly go and respond? Okay, thanks, Steffi. It's a great questions. First of all, it would generalize to the other diaspora groups in Germany and France, I mean Kurdish diaspora groups, because we had another study with Helen where she was specifically focusing on resistance strategies, but at least we could see that there were some kind of feeling powerful and powerlessness. But there, for instance, we never came across about how they were dealing about life in Germany in terms of migration policies and integration policies. But from my other friends and comrades, I know that there are similar processes across Europe, though I have no idea how it is being shaped in the US, for instance, or in Canada, because there are almost Kurds everywhere in the world and they are quite organized. So I have no idea, honestly. So that's how far I can respond to that within the large walls of Europe, I would say. Coming to language, yes, we spoke on Turkish because I'm an assimilated Kurdish, so I don't actively speak and understand well Kurdish. I have just a superficial understanding, and it's mostly ideological and organization and mobilization based, so it's not enough to do daily conversations. We did it in Turkish, but it was like because we knew each other politically, we trusted each other. Using Turkish was not so problematic. Yet I know that from both sides, as researcher and participant, we would all prefer to make that communication in Kurdish. But coming to your real question about the talking in Belgian, in Dutch, or in Flemish, or in French, no, I would say, because no, too, they couldn't. Most of them didn't speak so much of Flemish or French or Dutch. So they had really superficial knowledge of those languages, as they were either mostly in the process of integration, going to language classes, etc., or they were so submerged in the Kurdish communities that they were figuring out things with the help of some other people and then continuing their daily life in Kurdish. So they wouldn't speak those languages. So I have no idea how it would play out with that language. And it is true that it's that sympathetic and empathic interviewing is taking off the guards for sure to discuss more things in depth. But that doesn't mean that maybe I didn't show it enough clearly in my presentation, but that doesn't mean that they're discussing power in terms of boundaries. So they know the boundaries of their power, but it exists there. And some of them are not I mean, for instance, I was talking about being and becoming yourself, overcoming that colonial shame. For instance, those kinds of things won't be discussed when they would be discussing with a classical Turkish researcher. They just wouldn't. So yes, it takes the guards off a bit, on different level, also in terms of economic relationships. For instance, we have talked so much about how the economic relationships are structured, but most of it didn't go into the analysis, even because of opacity reasons. And there was a level of collective opacity that we decided that we shouldn't talk about those things to the outer world. So there's also that.
Um,
Sorry, I don't know if you were saying something back. Okay, sorry. No, I was briefly lost. Sorry. I love the questions that I heard answers. Sorry.
and I just wanted to note that Steffi is a previous presenter in the series, and you can find the recording of her talk here in our archives on Arab dissident reasoning. Muk.
Hello, everybody. Canan, thank you so much for your extensive work on this issue. I know it's also a very big concept for the Kurdish movement. So studying it as a, I don't know if you call yourself a psychologist, but let's say a social scientist is very important. So I have two questions. One is when you describe the interviews, you said that you would just let participants talk till they are exhaust themselves of whatever they want to talk about. So I wonder if that has something to do with the difficulty of um, coding problems that you experienced. Because especially with people who are politically active, or even though maybe they're not organized or anything, but they think about these issues a lot. There's an issue of too much terminology, talking with such like with all these like political terms with no apparent connection to the thing that is being discussed. So when you said, I sometimes intervened and I said, how is this related to power? So I think that's an invitation to come up with any sort of link, because it could be a moment that they realize they actually weren't talking about power, that they were like drifted off and started talking about other things. So I would actually, I haven't had the chance to read your manuscript. Hopefully, I will in the future. But I would like some reflection on that in the paper also, because I think it's important how those kinds of dynamics shape the data. Second thing is when they talked about recognition, the theme about, oh, now the world recognizes us through our fight with ISIS. So that's a big thing in the Kurdish movement, always, fighting against political and physical violence and getting recognition through that. So it also creates this dependency in the symbolic level, on the symbolic level, creates this dependency to assert power, which I think needs, especially in the context of Kurdish movement, requires some closer look, I feel like. So always having that theme, fighting against an evil power or fighting against physical violence. And the third one, just my little pet peeve about power studies, humbly saying this because I don't study power. Because of the over reliance on the hierarchical, like power from above frameworks that we kept reading all those decades, I think there's also sometimes a like push or like, I don't know, sort of push in the other direction also. Like we want to hear power in what our participants are saying to us. And sometimes that may sway us into the direction of connecting things that may not be about power and making them about power. So how much of this uh, have you seen, or maybe you think that wasn't in your data set? Because it's a very abstracting power, and if I was asked about how I value this construct for my community, whatever it may be, could be a feminist community, for instance, I could come up with things, uh, but it's also a difficult question. So I don't know what I would come up with. So how much of this did you see in the data? I don't know. Maybe this last point was a bit scattered, but yeah. Thank you, Jana.
No, the last point is great, and it also, I think, relates to resistance, right? We have that in our research on resistance as well, that we as researchers see resistance where participants are not necessarily articulating it as such. So there's a parallel issue. Janan, do you want to respond before we then go to Aisha?
Yes, thanks, Muk, for coming up with these nice questions. They're really important to me as well because, okay, I will try to connect your first and last question and reply together. So yes, there was too much content because I let them speak as much as they want, but each time it was deviating from the subject matter, I tried to reorient them. But that doesn't mean that I was trying to connect everything they said with the sense of power. Rather, it was like this. Okay, there are two things. First of all, despite what you expected, it's not political rhetorics. In fact, political rhetorics were less than I expected. Honestly, I was expecting also more political rhetorics with the politicized or politically engaged participants, though not all of my participants are politically active. At least half of the data is coming from people who were detached from the movement, or they are just continuing their daily life in Belgium. It's just they are partially interested in listening up to the news about Kurdistan and Kurdish struggle, but that's it. They are not even bragging about being Kurdish and fighting ISIS, etc., in the Belgian context. So there are many different participants, and political rhetorics were really few. Rather, it was long descriptions of their situation. For instance, in one participant's Faiz, who has been here like 3 or 4 years, if I remember correctly. She came here on exile right before COVID, which meant that she spent 2 years, 1.5, almost 2 years in the refugee camp. And she had such a desperation period. And she was narrating all of this for at least half an hour. I just can't stop that kind of narrative. And at that point, I'm not trying to connect it, of course, to the Kurdish power, as long as she mentions, for instance, but you know what? Once I was going out of the camp just to work and come back to camp, on my way back to camp, I just sit on a bank and realize that I'm still feeling Kurdish to my blood. So then it comes back to that. So you see, so it's not political rhetorical, but it's just people's need to talk, honestly. And it wasn't so much in my field work in Turkey and North Kurdistan. This is happening here in diaspora context, because they can't talk much about those kinds of things in their daily life. It's an opportunity to discuss those kinds of things. I don't know whether I respond, but I tried. And
Yes,
it connects
yes, you
to.
did. Thank you so
Okay,
much.
perfect. And this connects back to your well pointing to the push in the other direction, because we were reading too much of power from above. Now that we are trying to find our way to define power from below, how should I say that? I think it's not an either-or situation. My work specifically doesn't tackle structural inequalities. If I were to look on how the Turkish white supremacy is narrating all of that violence, rationalizing that violence and oppression, while together trying to understand how Kurds counter-narrated, and then try to see it with the detrimental effects on health and education, for instance, then I would be tackling the structural level of that top-down power more. That's also part of the limitation of my research. Neither my level of analysis nor my level of inquiry at that level. I can just get a grasp of where they are feeling powerless, how they're attributing this powerlessness to the colonial domination or to the hegemonic power. So that's how far I can go. So I agree with you. We shouldn't be pushed too much to the other side as well. But I think it has something to do with the limitations of my work, I believe. Finally, you talked about recognition. Let me try to remember.
Violence and recognition. So the recognition of the Kurdish movement or Kurdish existence.
Yes, fight with ISIS. Okay, so that's the thing. Maybe I wasn't enough clear there, but on one side, so it's quite dilemmatic. It happens within the same individual, but also across different participants. They value that fight against ISIS. They know that it was a fight for existence, but also an opportunity to establish a kind of democratic modernity as an attempted project in Syria. But they are also aware that this is being instrumentalized by the big power. So I think I am more interested and not in the recognition itself, but how they can critically make sense of that recognition. And it was there in the data. So I think I feel safe on that side, I guess.
Thank you so much, Emma.
Thank you.
Okay, we have one more question from the audience, and I would also like to throw in my question here so that I have a chance in our last 7 minutes. But you can answer that one at the end after Aricha's because it's more of a conclusion question. My question is, and this also actually goes to Young and Michelle, who study this as well, as you said, what we should, what our conclusion is, or our what's the main implications of these findings on reconceptualizing power for research and theorizing, but really just kind of recommendations for how the field should move forward? Does this mean, is it just a matter of changing the framing and the language of all of these studies that talk about high power, low power groups, right, and put it in this binary way? Is it about reinterpreting the findings? Is it about needing completely new research questions than the ones that have been asked, right? Like, what are the main recommendations for the field based on this shift away from, power from above dichotomous versus multifaceted conceptualizations from below? So that would be my suggestion for the final kind of wrap up comments. But first, we also have Aricha's question.
Finally. Thank you, Janar. I find inspiration from your work, and this was an excellent presentation as well. My question pertains to a methodological question because once I see your findings, it has a lot of phenomenological implications as well as phenomenological underpinnings, right? Being, becoming, and also navigating the body, in their body, as you say, Kurdishness in my blood. So and this question I open up to the reviewers as well, can we do more power studies using phenomenological analysis instead of thematic analysis? And is there a conscious choice why we are only doing thematic analysis instead of any form of phenomenological analysis? Because when we are saying becoming and identifying as part of becoming, there is a lot of scope for phenomenology to add to this kind of analysis. Yeah.
Ritra, thanks for coming up with that question. It's a wonderful question, and it gives me hope. Thank you. Yes, yeah, there are many phenomenological findings in it, but it's also part of my conceptualization. But it was also rooted in the Kurdish community and the way they are expressing themselves. So I just can't take out that part. That's why it's coming into the analysis as well, and I have a pleasure of doing so. And coming to your question specifically about why are we bound with the thematic analysis, I think we are creating lines of flight, as in Delos and Guattari, trying to go away from that traditional thematic analysis. And honestly, Brown and Clarke's reflexive thematic analysis gave me some breathing space in doing that. It has room for including phenomenological approaches. And that's why I specifically chose critical realist approach of analysis, because it is not exactly phenomenological analysis, but it creates some space to think about, to code all of those beings and becoming. So there is room in that, but in terms of experiences and narratives, of course. So I don't think that we are bound by thematic analysis. It doesn't have to be even reflexive thematic analysis. I think we definitely need phenomenological approaches within the work of researching power, but also other topics as well. It's not limited to power issues, if you ask me. So thank you for bringing up that. I don't know, maybe Michelle and Hu Yang would also like to comment on that. I don't know.
We don't have a whole lot of time left, though.
Okay.
So
maybe I just quickly reply to your intervention, Johanna, and if they have something to say, then they are welcome to say. Thanks for that, because I've been thinking about that as well. What is the implications of these findings? I mean, I'm doing community work. It's helpful for us, ourselves. Okay, this is something. But what else? Yes, we are trying to challenge the mainstream theories of power. But I think you are right. It may serve to reinterpret previous findings of low power, high power, but also either conflation of power and status, or a total disentanglement of power and status. I mean, there are also, for instance, approaches that that suggest that those are two separate things. I mean, they can't be two separate things, but they have some distinctions, of course, but they are probably in mutual constitution with each other. So I think this creates room for reinterpreting the existing finding, but also criticizing the experimental sets that have been devised to make those studies available. So it is mostly minority group paradigms in the laboratory by creating a sense of power based on creating new groups. Much less is done with real life groups. And when it is done, it is not based on real life events. It is based on, for instance, how do you call it? A small story or a news, a made up news about the intergroup dynamic. So I think it may serve to challenge not only the reinterpretation, but also the experimental setup for that. But it also recommends new research questions. For instance, one of them is also tied with the previous feedback that I received in this session. How all of this power from below would be working out in relationship with the privileged power or power from above. I mean, what are the contestations? Okay, we know the contestations, but how much space it is creating for each group? And does it serve to rebalance that asymmetry, or doesn't it make any change in rebalancing the asymmetry? Those are the first questions that comes to my mind as I try to reflect on my work as well.
Michelle and Huyang, would you like to add any last words to this question?
I can say briefly that I think one of the things that I disliked with the idea of like power and powerlessness is the idea, like it's sort of like characterized the group that is oppressed in very neutral terms without situating where the power is, you know. It's and I think part of it was also reflecting in some of the recent work that we did together with Yu Young about how these different ways in which groups can actually make sense of their group's power can have can shape their ideas about collective agency and then resistance. I do think that, you know, situating groups that have been oppressed as being powerless can have this double effect of being disempowering. But also, so I guess my brief point would be that it's not just the renaming of the terms, it's the idea that when you call out what power is, especially at the different levels, then you don't situate one group as having power in this neutral way and another group as having low power in this very neutral way as well. But actually creating this multidimensional views of power that can be more, I guess, authentic or reflective of how the society is actually working.
Huyang?
Yeah, I will just say really briefly. I think the whole idea about the mainstream psychologist idea about power, and also more broadly, like mainstream Western intellectuals' idea about power and by extension, resistance, violence, they are all colonized. That's like the main point about the Franz Fanon and also other philosophers who study power, right? So we should really start asking power is defined by whom and violence, what is violence and not non-violence, and what is defined, how those terms are defined by people who have chokehold on defining scientific terms and concepts and constructs. So I don't know, going back to our whole uh, talking points about this bottom up and very dialectic and very fluid nature of power, I think we really need to, like get rid of our whole this dichotomic idea about what is power and what is powerless and what is empowerment in this in between those two constructs, or is it like a whole different thing? I think yeah, the we should very start with the very definitions of those things first, and yeah, that's just my yeah contribution to this conversation, I guess.
I'll just say as a caveat, I think for me, most like the thing I really puzzle and about and ponder is, as a social constructivist, critical researcher and whatever, like, yes, I completely buy that we need to look at definitions of power from below and think about how the oppressed conceptualize power. And yet we also know that this power from above is also very real, right? And it also exists as a strong, social representation in society as well, apart from material implications. And we see that actually come up in various findings as well, right? Like Huyong in your study, where we were hoping to, your recent one, where we were hoping to find kind of these more critical effects, but actually power as dominance was one of the strongest predictors because people also internalize those lay perceptions, but not everyone and not all the time, right? So kind of thinking about how to integrate those different levels and when which are relevant and not become completely kind of detached from the or like too social constructivist about it, I guess. So that for me remains the largest puzzle, how to make sense of these very different sets of findings. All right. Unfortunately, I think we have to end the session, even though we could, and I hate to cut this off, but I have another meeting and an electrician in the house who's waiting to shut off the power, so I know the electrical power. So, so we need to end, but to be continued in various formats. I think, if anyone here on the call is interested in reading Canan's draft, Canan is happy probably to share it with a select group of people. And hopefully we'll see also the next versions of this paper soon. So thank you again so much for this
Thank you
rich
all.
conversation and to be continued.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.